For a long time, I never had a Self-MOC. Gringat himself was originally a goblin sort of character who I never really got around to doing much with, despite the fact that my account was named after him. Gringat the Repugnant, the original, didn't feature in anything I really did. The original concept was for a goblin sort of character who went around in a caravan and made trinkets and all that sort of thing. And in terms of nowadays, his Matoran form reflects that still, with the whole the idea behind him being in a caravan and going to different islands and tinkering and all that sort of stuff. But Toa Gringat was a different beast altogether. The original didn't have any backstory behind him whatsoever, and was really just an experiment in the colour scheme. You see the two scythe blades he's got on his chest there, and you see the fins he's got on his shoulders, and those have remained throughout all the other MOCs, as have his spear and shield generally. But the original MOC was nothing more than their experiment, and nothing more than saying, alright, Gringat's my account name, I need a Self-MOC, here it is. When I'd made the second Gringat, I developed a little bit more as a mocker. I'd gone past the whole Inika body stage, and started experimenting with custom torsos, which still use quite a lot of prefab parts. His body was actually based off Maxilos, and as I say, he retained his spear and shield, and the scythe blades carried on through his gauntlet weapon, which hasn't appeared since then. This version wasn't much better than the first, but it did start detailing the beginning of my storyline, which was fairly obscure and not very well thought out, and just revolved about him being an elemental lord with his brothers who had other elements, and being in some sort of island. And it was all very skeletal, not very well thought out, but eventually it developed into the gigantic storyline you now see me with. Here, between versions 2 and 3, we have Jester and Kelzuk, who are completely unrelated to Gringat and his storyline, but they did use his parts. For some reason, I can't remember, I combined the second version of Gringat with Pharaoh and Skirmix, Tarduk, and Ranu, the sets, to build this character and his Agori helper. And this was at the same time as the Goltorian had just come out. Might go to show quite how much I still didn't relate to Gringat, and how much I didn't really care for what Gringat was. The next version we have is Titan Gringat, which was arguably one of my worst MOCs ever made. Its proportions are all off, his arms are really skinny, but he was an experiment with my first sort of Titan sort of build, and he also set precedent for quite a lot of things that would remain constant through Gringat's later forms. The entire body is actually one of Moon Werewolf Air's old builds, who unfortunately isn't a member of MOCpages anymore. She no longer experiments and builds things with MOCs, but she is an amazing artist on DeviantArt. Her torso design I tried to extend into a Titan build, which didn't work so well perhaps. I also copied the ear design from one of her MOCs called Ovidux, and that stayed the same ever since. About the same time as I made Titan Gringat, I also made his first Matoran form, which used, again, quite an experimental arm technique that I'd come up with on a previous MOC, and then wanted to use for Gringat. He, like I said before, was closer to the original concept of Gringat I had for him to be the sort of wandering gadgets trader sort of character. He also gave the first glimpse of his early storyline on the island of Polyaz. Gringat's tarantula form introduced the first version of Gringat that I was really proud of. He was an entry to the Bionicle Displays Multicoloured Titan contest that was held about Halloween, generally around Halloween 2009. and he was a massive build. I also introduced, to fit with the rules, a bit of crystal sort of blue colour, which again was a bit of a precedent which has remained through later MOCs. I say the build was massive, it was very well articulated, and featured some build designs that really set me up to be a lot better at doing what I did. When Bionicle ended, Gringat was much more of a self-mock to me than he had ever been before, and so making him as a stars build made a lot of sense. And while it looks similar to the Matoran form, it really isn't. I'd gone on an awful lot as a mocker since then, and despite the fact that he uses the prefab torso and everything, the amount of added parts, greebles, and just using up the space of the mock is a lot better. He uses Ovidux's ear design still, he retains the spear and shield, and he also has a firefly with him, which was synonymous with part of a old storyline that I had written for him. Strangely enough, he's also the only version of Gringat not to use the two scythe blades that have been through all the other versions. Gringat the Air Lord was the first really serious look into Gringat and making him a really serious Toa-sized self-mock. And he remained as my self-mock for quite a long time. He used an awful lot of detailed parts, greebles, system bits, and really came into MOCpages as my real identity, as being the self-mock. He, however, was very skeletal, and while he was sort of my identity sort of character, he didn't sit too well with me. He didn't really have the sort of gravitas and sort of elder look to him that I really wanted. Tangri was weird. She was built out of Gringat's pieces, once again, for TML's Gender Bender contest here on YouTube, and the idea of having Gringat as a woman didn't really sit well with many people, especially not me, and many other people with other self-mocks rationalised it off as just a female version who existed at the same time as the male version. With me, I made Tangri Gringat's daughter, and she offshoots in her own bit of storyline, becoming one of the bad guys in the end. It was quite strange. Anyway, I introduced Silver to Tangri's colour scheme in quite a big way, because in the storyline, not only was there Gringat's colour scheme involved, but also her mother would have been Soleku, a Tower of Sonics. Eventually that bit of storyline didn't quite work, and I replaced her with Tin, who was a Tower of Lightning, who fitted better with the canon. But either way, Silver would have been introduced, and Tangri would have been born. The first version of Gringat was Toa Gringat, and as I said at the beginning of the video, he didn't really factor in much storyline-wise. In fact, most of Gringat's adventures as a Toa were completely undocumented. I'd basically gone from Matoran to Elemental Lord of Taraga without anything in between. So then I built Gringat as a Toa Vanambar, and started to flesh out his storyline as a Toa, and attempted to build him as he would have looked as a Toa. And so Toa Gringat deliberately didn't have the ear spikes, and I built him a very practical looking sort of spear and shield combo, and tried to make him look a lot more upright, a lot more heroically posed, but his legs came out a bit strangely, and I didn't really like him too much as a mock. About the same time, as I made the Toa, I also thought, why not revamp his Matoran form as well? So Gringat as a Matoran as a second version is a lot more compact, and his arms don't have that weird kink in them anymore. He doesn't have so much jutting off his back, and he also has these little things on his shoulders which link with the design of the next Self-MOC that I built as another version of the Airlord form. Gringat the Stormlord is probably the version of my Self-MOC that most people got to know as my Self-MOC. He stayed as my Self-MOC for over a year, despite the fact that I didn't intend to keep him around for long. My intention was to keep him there as a sort of placeholder while I came up with a couple of better designs. He's the first Gringat to use a cloak, which was from the Build a Zerg set, the Toy Story sets. And getting that cloak on was an absolute nightmare because it meant I had to create a separate sort of block for his head and neck, which connected through a tiny pinhole around his cloak, and to actually get the cloak out meant removing part of his chest, removing his head, and undoing some chain links, and it was really hard to put back together. As far as the MOC himself goes, the torso was incredibly complex. He came in with the idea of using odd socks as being a bit more of a Self-MOC, because strangely enough, odd socks happen to be quite often in real life. I also gave him a side sword and introduced the Knights Kingdom shin armour, which has also stayed with him since then. Gringat's minifig form came in to begin with as a little bit of a joke, but it does sort of make sense. Nicknamed Mingat, sort of mini Gringat, it doesn't have many pieces, but those it does do fit with him as a Self-MOC, and he has proved to be quite useful for various things where I don't want to use the full-size Self-MOC. He was originally meant to come in his own building, which was meant to be his air tower, but considering that I have virtually no skills with the actual bricks system, that's been shelved, probably indefinitely. On my 18th birthday last year, I released Gringat the Hawklord, who is probably my favourite version of the Self-MOC, certainly the most detailed and most faithful to the original concept. He's the first one to actually have a heartlight and be able to integrate a heartlight, and he uses lots and lots of greebles, lots and lots of spiked parts, custom foot design, a custom upper leg design, which is incredibly detailed, and also a pair of wings. Unfortunately, the thinness of his waist caused some consternations when he was posted on MOCpages, because he obviously it's a little bit disproportionate, a little bit thin. The logic behind it was to make him look an awful lot like the original Toa Mata with the flexible spine down the middle. And I still stand by that. I still like the way it looks, despite so many problems other people have. But other people all over MOCpages, ever since I built the first Gringat, have been making their own versions of my Self-MOC, which I really love. And so the rest of this video is going to be showing you the versions that other people have made.